Hi there. Thank you for taking the time to listen to me tell the story of how my art piece, I Am Light, unfolded. As an art therapy student, trauma class was the most challenging class by far, and I learned a lot about myself and about the world and how to help people. So I hope you enjoy hearing the story of how everything evolved. The canvas as a container project has been such an evolutionary process for me, and as I reflect on it, I become aware of how the changes are a visual representation of my journey and a timeline of it as well. So much of what I did was unconscious and unintentional, yet it naturally became what it was supposed to be. My first task was to create a holding space, something to contain what I would put into it throughout the semester. I wanted to build up the edges so that they would create a short wall all the way around the border. I wanted the sensory experience of molding something, but I knew clay would be too heavy, so I used paper mache. Because it's so messy, I took the canvas outside to work, and as I was working outside, I looked up and noticed my shadow cast onto the canvas. It inspired me to make my container into a mirror, one that would hold and reflect back any shadow aspects of myself. I knew that this class was going to reflect back the parts of me that still needed healing. I worried that I wouldn't be strong enough or healed enough to handle the intensity of the topics. This is reminiscent of how I felt when I first began therapy 6 years ago. I worried that I wouldn't be strong enough to deal with the things that would get uncovered. As a final touch on the holding environment, I wrote the definitions of trauma that we came up with together as a class. In a way, this was like naming what happened to me as trauma. Acknowledging that there were really hard and scary things locked inside of my heart, mind, and body was the start of the healing process. The next thing to be added to the canvas was a base for self-care. I had a very therapeutic experience on a nature walk that week, so I decided to recreate the brook I waded in and the surrounding forest. When I think back to the beginning of healing, the base for self-care was learning how to set boundaries. The brook makes me think of a literal boundary that flows between me and the forest and the rest of the world. I particularly enjoyed this part of the assignment because I was able to work outside and it was a beautiful day. A few weeks later, we learned about principles of practice in trauma-informed care. One of the very first principles is establishing safety. My representation of safety was a hammock and the sun shining up in the sky. Something about being held in my safe care environment and the warmth of the sun shining down on me just felt very comforting to me. The week I thought would be the most challenging was representing my story. And it wasn't actually as bad as I thought it would be. Putting it on a canvas in metaphorical images made it feel separate from me and reminded me that it was all in the past. It wasn't pretty, but it wasn't nearly as dark or threatening as it felt in my mind. Seeing it in a different way took away its power. On week 7, we had to incorporate a positive relationship with someone in a position of power. I chose to use the image of a flashlight to represent my therapist. She shined a light for me during a really dark time, lighting the path that got me out of the darkness. Her light illuminated my path and reminded me of the strength I had all along. The following week, we took a break from the canvas and created a relationship with an imbalance of power that was harmful. We created with the intention of destroying the finished product. I created and I destroyed. I drew the relationship and I tore it to shreds. I was left with a small rectangular section that I drew to represent myself. It had been ripped up in the destruction phase, but I taped it back together. The excess ripped parts were burned and buried, and I saved the rectangle, not knowing what I would do with it. I had to destroy who I was in order to escape an extremely toxic situation. I put myself back together, and I've been trying to figure out who I am ever since. Personal process was the next phase of the evolution, and it was my favorite part. I took off the flashlight, the sun, and the hammock. I decided to invert the colors of the foreground and the background. In this way, I pushed the darkness outward and was filled with light. I gained an awareness that I no longer need the external sources of light because I am the light. It is inside of me and it has kept me going. It is the compassion I have for others and now for myself. It is the love I give freely to the people around me. It is my creativity, my passion, and my soul. I added the sun back to the canvas, but this time I placed it in my core. This new awareness has made me see that I'm in a different season of life than I was when this all began. I had to let go of what I thought my life would look like, and as a result, the trees had to shed their leaves. Some of the flowers had to die. This season of letting go has meant the ending of a lot of things, but the beginning of many bright and beautiful things. The last and final touch was integrating the little repaired rectangle into the center of the sun, because I have a much better understanding of who I am and exactly what I am capable of. The light inside of me originates from who I am, and I may have to destroy or repair a few more times, but I will never let that light be diminished again. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to my story. Stay tuned because I think this one may only be finished for now. There are more seasons to come.